Hi, I'm Allie. Join me as I create these disc burst earrings featuring DiscDuos, some Delicas, and some crystals. Remember, if you need a complete list of supplies, go ahead and look below the video in the description, and you'll get links there to our website to gather up all your materials. Grab a bead on it board, your materials, and let's get started. So for these earrings, we're going to be using a DiscDuo in the center. And the DiscDuo in the center is going to be encapsulated by the brick stitch with the Delica beads. To begin, I have a size 10 needle with some size 6 or size 8 dragon thread in the green color because the color beads that I'm using. And I have about 3 feet on my needle for one earring. I'm going to go through one hole of the DiscDuo. It's 2 holes. And I'm taking the thread the whole way through till I just have about 3 inches at the base of the thread. From here, we're going to wrap the thread around the exterior of the DiscDuo, going through that same hole, starting at the lower thread end and going toward the top. Again, that thread is going to lay along the side of the DiscDuo. You can hardly see it because the green on green, but that's what we're going to attach to as we're going in and doing our brick stitch. Following, we're going to go down through the second hole of the DiscDuo. That's going to put thread toward the top, connecting those top 2 holes. We're going to take our thread, then go to the exterior, going back through that same hole that we just came through. And then we need thread along the bottom of the DiscDuo. So we're coming out hole number 2 there at the bottom. We're going to go back up through hole number 1, repeating our first stitch. That's going to get our thread toward the exterior of our DiscDuo, the whole way around. One on the right, one on the left, the loop there at the top, loop at the bottom. From here, you can begin your brick stitch with any size beads that you want. I'm choosing the Delica 11-0 because they line up really nicely next to one another, and they'll sit really great along that side of the DiscDuo. We're now going to begin our brick stitch. So to begin our brick stitch, we are going to start by picking up 2 of our Delica beads, and we're going to go underneath the thread that goes from hole number 1 there to hole number 2. So we're sewing underneath the thread. Pull your thread the whole way through, and then we're going to sew back up through bead number 2 toward bead number 1. What this is going to do is get the beads to sit next to one another with the holes sitting from top to bottom. Normally when you bead, the holes are sitting side to side. With brick stitch, we want the beads to sit up on their right side up. So we have our next bead then that we're going to put on. We're coming out of the top of that Delica bead, and we're going to go through and underneath that same thread line. So the one that's looping from one hole to the other. Tucking underneath that thread line then, you're going to take your needle back up through that bead that you just added and out through the top. As you do brick stitch, you are naturally creating our next row of thread that we're going to link into with these bridge threads. The bridge threads are threads that go and connect one bead to another. So the bridge thread here is going to be the beads or the thread connecting between those 2 beads. You're going to now go to the exterior line, adding a bead, and then going and sewing underneath that thread that runs along the side of the DiscDuo. We're going to repeat the brick stitch the whole way along the exterior of the DiscDuo, adding 1 bead at a time. You want your beads to sit nice and tight next to one another. You don't want them too close that they're going to move and kind of wave back and forth. So right up next to, not too close, continuing to pick up a bead, go underneath that thread that we added towards the exterior, and then back up through the bead before adding our next one. That first bead that we added in the brick stitch, when you add 2 at a time, this one's kind of hanging out a little bit. Don't worry about that because as we go around the exterior, we're going to connect to it as we get our last bead in place. We're going to connect the last bead to the first bead. Continue adding your beads around the DiscDuos, pulling tightly to make sure that there's not any gap between the Delicas and the ridge of your DiscDuo. As you finish up this brick stitch here, you'll notice you have a little bit of a gap. You're going to be tempted to put another bead in there but don't. You don't want too many beads again because you get that wave in the beads. Your thread is coming out the top of the last delica, and we are going to go into the top of the first delica, sewing from the top down, creating a bridge thread from the last bead to the first bead. When we do so, then also you want to sew underneath the bridge thread that's underneath there. That can be a little tricky when you're using a thinner thread, just to make sure you're down there underneath, and then back up through that bead. If the bridge thread pops out, you know you didn't get the thread underneath and it didn't connect. Going in here then, you kind of pull it to the side, and that's going to bring those all around into a circle, making sure that they are evenly spaced throughout the DiscDuo. From here, then what we're going to do is get ready to add our next row of our brick stitch, which is going to consist of 8 delicas. So they're a big delica with a pretty large hole, and we are going to cap the sides of it as we're adding the brick stitch with some 15 O's. These 15 O's then we're going to use to do our little bursts on the outside and catch on to them, but also realistically, they cover up the thread that you're going to see from that arch naturally as you go from a smaller loop to a bigger, going out from the center of the DiscDuo. On your thread and needle, you are going to put an 8-0, 2 15-0s, and an 8-0. Because remember, as we do brick stitch, the first beads that we put on in each new row, you're adding 2 at a time. We're going to skip over some bridge threads, 1 and 2 bridge threads, and we're going to sew underneath the bridge thread connecting those delica beads. So we were going underneath the thread that wrapped along the exterior of the DiscDuos. Now we're going to catch on to the thread that's coming out between those delicas that we added. Sewing underneath there, then you're going to go back up through your second delica toward those seed beads. That'll sit our 8-0 delicas on end. You can see here as I pull how that's going to sit. Now we want them to sit up straight. And as we come around and add our next one, this is going to happen. And then as we add our crystals, they'll even go into a better fitting place. After each 8-0 delica, instead of going right into the next delica, you want to add 2 15s to your needle. Then pick up your next 8-0 and then go over to the next bridge thread. Now the 8-0s are substantially larger than the 11-0s. So what is going to happen is you are going to use less 8-0 seed beads than the amount of bridge threads that you have. That being said, what that means is that we are going to get to a point where we skip and we don't have any time that we go through that thread underneath connecting those 2 delica beads there. So we're going to add 2 more of our 15-0s, grab our next bead. I'm skipping the next one just because it's a tighter fit. And if we add every single bridge thread there, we are going to end up with our delicas too close together. Add 2 more beads, another one of your delicas. This time go right into the next bridge thread. So you can see you're going to end up skipping some, and you want them to sit comfortably as you're using them around the piece. Going underneath the bridge threads, you can see how it loops there, and then pulling. The 15-0 seed beads will sit on the side. Some of them will fall into the delicas a little bit. Don't worry about that, because again, as we add our last row after this one, they will sit up correctly and you'll be fine with it. So I've done 2 bridge threads in a row. And then the next one that I do, I'm going to have to skip the next bridge thread. It's going to be too tight, and go over to the next one in line. Going back up through that 8 then. Making sure when you're going back through those 8-0 delicas that you are not, I repeat, not going through the 15-0s, just coming out through those delicas. Go ahead and continue with the design. And then as we get back to the start, I have 1 more that I'm going to put on after this one. Just like we linked the first and last 11-0 delica to one another, we're going to link and connect the first and last 8-0 delica to one another. Last one going on there, connecting that bridge thread. And those 2 15-0s want to sit into the interior there. I'm going to pop them out just so they don't get too close. and hide. Oh, there's just one in there. Gotta add another one. Sewing back underneath that bridge thread. Going in there, sewing that out. Getting back on another one here. Going under and connecting. So you can see if you need to sew out through the project, totally doable. From here, then, we are going to get ready to connect these two. Now, it is a big arch to go there, so I'm going to need one more seed bead on, adding in my 2 11-0s. Oh, there was that missing seed bead underneath that first bridge thread. Back up through, just through the bead, not through the 15s. Grab 2 more 15s, and we are going to catch on to that first 11-0. Or that first, I'm sorry, 8-0 bead. I'm just going to push that 15 out of the way. Right there. So into that first one. So we're going from the last 8 into the first 8. Sewing underneath the bridge thread. Underneath. And then back up through that bead. Out through the top now. I'm just going to take my fingers, like I do with all brick stitch, and just kind of pull at it, making sure that it's not pulled too tight. Now we're going to get ready to include and add our crystals on the exterior. This is super simple. So we are going to sew through our 15-0s along the top of those 8s. As we do so, pick up a Delica, a 3mm crystal. I'm using the light rose color, and then one of my 15-0s. Hold that down next to your project, sewing back down through the crystal towards the Delica, making sure you don't have a lot of extra thread showing, picking up one more Delica then, and sewing through our next 2 15s. And see how it creates just that little burst of crystal going towards the outside. You're going to do this with every single one until the very end, and that last one we're going to get ready to include our wire guard so we can attach it to our earring. When you have one more space, we are going to add our wire guard. If you want to, you can actually add the crystal and then attach a wire guard at the top. I like that they look like they're bursting out from the ear wire, and it keeps the ear wire a little bit closer so they don't hang quite as long. I'm adding a little bit of that green color in between to mimic and match the DiscDuo. And then I'm going to go up through the wire guard at the top here. Add another green after going through the second side of the wire guard. If you've never used a wire guard before or you don't have one, you can use a jump ring. Make sure that it's soldered because this thin thread, the beading thread, will most likely make its way out through the jump ring. So it's why I love wire guards. It also just gives a nice polished look. From here, go through those 2 15-0s right after, and then we're going to reinforce going through the wire guard again. So how are we getting there? We are going to circle around through the project, through the 8-0 seed beads. Go through the 8-0 underneath here, go back through the 8-0 there, and then loop on through the Delica wire guard, and then down through the opposite side. Once you're down through the opposite side, go ahead and just tuck right back into that same 8-0 Delica. From here then, go into the 11-0 Delica, sitting right below it, taking your needle and thread through the bead. So see how we're just tucking to the back there. I bring it to the back because what that's going to do is allow me to see, just bringing it to whichever side my thread starter is on, and I can see how far I need to weave it back into the project. So see how the thread end is here? What we are going to do is get our thread right near each other. So I'm going to tuck underneath the design here, through the DiscDuo. If you were right next to it, you could loop through your Delica beads. It's going to be faster for me to get over there through that bead. The green thread is nice and really easy to hide. So I'm going to just tie the 2 thread ends together. Right over left, left over right. spinning that thread into a nice, simple knot. Grab your thread burner, burn down the thread edges close to the design, and then burn them flat against the project. From here then, what you want to do is open up your ear wire and just attach your earring to it. So when you open up your ear wire, you're not opening up the wire guard at all, and there's no way to do that. You're just going to grab with your plier, turn your ear wire opening to the side. So we're not pulling back, we're just moving it to the side, slipping on the wire guard. If the wire guard, if you pinch it closed and you can't get over the little ball there, you just go up through the back of your ear wire and then close it up to finish these fun DiscDuo Burst Earrings. Thanks so much for joining me for these disc burst earrings. They're really fun to get almost like an Aztec look in the design. You can change up the seed beads if you don't have Delicas and use 11 O's and 8 O seed beads. If you do so, please comment below and let us know exactly how many beads you used to vary the design. This helps out other Potomac beaders that may be looking and joining in our community. As always, if you need the materials, look below the video. We'll put links there to get back to our site. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for joining me, and stay tuned for more inspirational videos.